I'm standing at her door. It's 11 p.m. I have the key she gave me a year ago. I unlock it. I push it open. And the first thing I see are his shoes. Nick's shoes. My best friend Nick's shoes. Just sitting there in her hallway. I didn't walk in. I didn't say a word. I just closed the door back, quietly, walked back to my car, sat down, and stared out the window for 20 minutes straight. Here's the part that still messes with me. I wasn't even surprised. Some part of me already knew. Had known for a while. I just kept telling myself I was being paranoid. That I was the problem. Today, I'm going to tell you everything. How long it was going on. What I missed. What happened when I finally confronted them both. And honestly, the hardest part of this story isn't what they did. It's what I did when I found out. Her name was Kayla. We met about 2.5 years before all of this happened. Mutual friends, house party, nothing dramatic. She walked in, we started talking, and I just didn't want to stop talking to her. You know that feeling? Where you meet someone and 3 hours feel like 20 minutes? That was her. We were officially together about 3 weeks after that night. And for the first year, honestly, it was great. Like genuinely great. The kind of relationship where you think, okay, maybe I've been doing this wrong my whole life, and this is what it's actually supposed to feel like. She was sharp. Funny in a dry way that most people didn't catch at first. She had this thing where she'd say something completely deadpan, and you'd be halfway through your next sentence before you realize she got you. I loved that about her. I told her that once, and she looked at me like I'd just handed her something she didn't know she'd been waiting for. We moved in together after about 14 months. Her idea, but I was ready. I'd been ready for a while. Now. Nick. Nick and I go back to freshman year of high school. 14 years. This is the guy I called at 2 a.m. when my car broke down junior year of college, an hour outside of nowhere, and he drove out without a single complaint. This is the guy who sat with me in the hospital waiting room the night my dad had his first heart attack. Didn't ask if I needed anything. Didn't make it weird. Just showed up and sat there. For 6 hours. When I started dating Kayla, Nick was the first person I told. Not my brother. Not my mom. Nick. Because that's just how it was between us. He was the person whose opinion actually meant something to me. He met her maybe 3 weeks in. We all grabbed food together. Low pressure. Just a casual thing. I was a little nervous, if I'm being honest. Not because I thought it would go badly. More because I cared. I wanted the two most important people in my life to actually like each other. They got along immediately. Like, weirdly well. Same humor. Same energy. They spent half the dinner going back and forth while I just sat there smiling like an idiot, thinking, this is perfect. My girlfriend and my best friend actually click. Do you know how rare that is? Most guys I know have to keep those two worlds completely separate. I thought I got lucky. Nick told me afterward, and I quote, "Bro, she's the one. Don't mess it up." I laughed. I told Kayla what he said. She smiled and said, "Nick's smart." I think about that a lot now. Because here's what I didn't see at the time. Or maybe what I chose not to see. There's a difference between your girlfriend getting along with your best friend and something else entirely. And looking back, the signs were there from pretty early on. Not obvious. Not loud. Just small things that didn't quite add up, that I filed away somewhere and never went back to look at. Like the time she corrected me about something Nick had said, something he'd told me about his week, and she had details I'd never given her. I remember thinking, that's weird, and then immediately thinking of an explanation and moving on. Or the time I noticed they'd been texting. Not a lot. Just, I happened to see his name on her screen while she was setting her phone down, and something in my chest did this small, quiet thing that I ignored completely. I ignored it because I trusted them both. I ignored it because the alternative was a thought I wasn't willing to think yet. That's the thing about denial. It doesn't feel like weakness when you're in it. It feels like being reasonable. It feels like not overreacting. It feels like being the kind of person who doesn't blow up good things over nothing. Except it wasn't nothing. And somewhere underneath all that reasonable, rational thinking, I already knew that too. The signs didn't show up all at once. That's not how it works. It's never some big obvious moment that slaps you in the face. It's 100 small things, spread out over weeks, that your brain quietly collects and stores somewhere you don't look. The first thing I actually noticed, like really noticed, not just filed away, was her phone. Kayla had never been weird about her phone. Early in the relationship, she'd leave it on the table face up, forget it in the other room, hand it to me to look something up without even thinking about it. That's just how she was. Open, unbothered. And then, at some point, I couldn't even tell you exactly when, that changed. The phone started going face down whenever she set it somewhere. She started taking it with her to the bathroom. One night, I picked it up to check the time because mine was charging in the other room, and she was across the apartment in the kitchen, and I swear I heard her footsteps change. Like she clocked what I was doing from 30 feet away, and her whole body responded. I didn't say anything. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then there was the schedule thing. Nick and I had this loose thing we'd been doing for years. Not every week, but pretty regularly. We'd grab food, or catch a game, or just hang at one of our places. Nothing formal. Just two guys who'd known each other forever, keeping that connection going. And somewhere around month 2 of whatever was actually happening, Nick started being unavailable. Not in a dramatic way. Not like he disappeared. Just busier than usual. Always had something going on. New thing at work. Plans with other people. Just not feeling up to it tonight. All completely normal excuses. The kind of thing that would never register if it happened once or twice. But it kept happening. And it kept happening on the same nights that Kayla was also, by coincidence, busy. I noticed that maybe 3 or 4 times before, I consciously put it together. And the moment I did, I felt sick. Not angry. Just sick. Like my body understood something my mind was still refusing to. I ran through the logic. Told myself it was a coincidence. Told myself I was connecting dots that weren't actually connected because I was stressed about other things. I was working a lot that month. Sleep wasn't great. I was probably just in my head. I almost convinced myself. And then the conversation happened. We were sitting on the couch one night, Kayla and me, just watching something. Nothing serious. And I made some offhand comment about Nick. Something dumb. I think I said he'd bailed on me again and was becoming flaky lately. Just venting. The kind of thing you say to your partner because they're supposed to be on your side. She didn't laugh it off. She didn't say, "Yeah, that's annoying. What's going on with him?" She went quiet for a second. And then she said, "I mean, maybe he just has a lot going on right now." The way she said it. Not defensive. Not suspicious. Just careful. Like she was choosing the words. Like she knew more about what was going on with Nick than she should have. I looked at her. She was still watching the TV. I didn't push it. I just sat there and felt something cold move through my chest, and I kept watching the show, and neither of us said anything else about it. That was the night I stopped being able to explain it away. I didn't confront her. Not then. I don't know exactly why. Part of it was that I still didn't have anything concrete. Just feelings, patterns, a tone of voice. Part of it was fear. Because I think I understood that once I asked the question out loud, I couldn't unask it. And everything that came after would be different. So I waited. I watched. I started paying attention in a way I hadn't let myself before. And the more I paid attention, the worse it got. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because once you're really looking, once you stop giving people the benefit of the doubt you've been handing them on autopilot, you see things. Little things. The way she'd get a text and her expression would shift just slightly before she turned the screen over. The way she said Nick's name in conversation, when it came up naturally, just in passing, with this tiny extra weight to it, like the name meant more than it used to. I started sleeping badly. Not couldn't fall asleep badly. More like waking up at 4 a.m. with this low, constant dread that I couldn't attach to anything specific enough to address. I went about 3 weeks like that, knowing and not knowing at the same time, carrying something I hadn't named yet, because naming it made it real. And then I went to her apartment on a Tuesday night with a key she'd given me a year ago, and I saw the shoes. I stood there for a second longer than I should have, my hand still resting on the door, like if I just didn't move, didn't breathe too loudly, didn't fully accept what I was seeing, then somehow it wouldn't become real. Like I was balancing on that thin edge between knowing and not knowing, and I still had the option to step back. Nick's shoes were right there in her hallway, placed casually against the wall. Not messy, not rushed, not like someone had just stopped by for a minute, but settled in a way that made it painfully obvious that he was comfortable there, that this wasn't unusual, that this space, her space, had already made room for him in a way I hadn't allowed myself to imagine before. And that was the part that actually hit me the hardest. Not even the fact that he was inside, not even the implication of what that meant, but how normal it looked, how easy it was to picture him walking in, taking his shoes off without hesitation, knowing exactly where to put them, moving through that apartment, like he wasn't a guest at all. Like I was. I didn't step inside, didn't call her name, didn't give myself the chance to hear something I wouldn't be able to forget. Because I knew that the second I made a sound, the second they realized I was there, everything would explode into something loud and ugly and irreversible, and I wasn't ready for that. Or maybe I just didn't want to see their faces when it happened. So instead, I slowly pulled the door back toward me, careful with the handle, careful with the sound, like I was leaving somewhere I didn't belong anymore, like I was the one intruding, and then I closed it quietly and stood there for a moment in the hallway, staring at nothing, feeling that strange, hollow stillness settle into my chest. The walk back to my car didn't take long, but it felt stretched out, like every step had weight to it, like the world around me had stayed exactly the same, while something inside me had shifted, just enough to make everything feel slightly off, slightly disconnected, like I was watching my own life from a step outside of it. I got into the driver's seat and just sat there without starting the engine, my hands resting on the steering wheel, while I stared straight ahead at the empty street, not really thinking in full sentences, just fragments moving through my head without landing anywhere. Nick. Her. How long? How many times? How did I not see it sooner? Or maybe the worst question, how long had I been seeing it, and choosing not to understand it? At some point, my phone started buzzing in the cup holder, lighting up the inside of the car in short, sharp flashes that felt too bright for how quiet everything else was. And I ignored it at first, because I already knew who it was. Because there was really only one person it could be. Kayla. It buzzed again, and then again, until I finally picked it up and saw 3 missed calls and 1 message sitting there like nothing had changed, like everything was still normal. Hey, are you coming over tonight? I read it once, then again, then a third time, like I was expecting something hidden between the words, some shift in tone, some sign that she knew that I knew. But there was nothing. Just a simple, casual message sent while my best friend's shoes were still sitting in her hallway. And that's when something inside me moved. Not breaking, not snapping, just quietly shifting into place in a way that felt almost colder than anger. Because I realized that this wasn't a sudden mistake, wasn't a one-time thing, wasn't anything accidental. You don't get that comfortable by accident. You don't move like that in someone else's space, unless you've been there before. More than once. And all those small moments I had been collecting, without fully acknowledging them, suddenly lined up in a way that made too much sense. Like pieces of something I had refused to put together, finally forming a picture I couldn't ignore anymore. I didn't reply to her message, didn't call back, didn't give myself the chance to hear her voice and pretend for even a second that things were still what they used to be. And instead, I set my phone face down on the passenger seat and sat there a little longer before finally starting the car and driving home through streets that looked exactly the same, but didn't feel like they belonged to the same life. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Just lay there staring at the ceiling while my mind kept replaying everything over and over again. Every conversation, every canceled plan, every small hesitation I had ignored, building a timeline out of moments I should have understood earlier. And the worst part was how clear it all became the more I went through it. There wasn't one moment where it started. There wasn't one mistake. It had been growing, slowly and quietly, right in front of me, and I had let it happen. Around 5 in the morning, after hours of staring at the ceiling and replaying the same thoughts until they stopped even feeling like thoughts and started feeling like something heavier, something that just sat in my chest without moving, I finally sat up, swung my legs off the bed, and realized I couldn't just leave it like this. Couldn't keep existing in that space between knowing and pretending not to know. Because that's what it had become. Not confusion, not suspicion, knowing. And the only thing worse than finding out the truth is living with it while acting like you haven't. I picked up my phone from the nightstand and turned it over, the screen lighting up instantly with more messages than I expected, and for a second, I just stared at it, not opening anything yet, just letting that small wave of anticipation build in a strange, detached way. Kayla had texted again. "Did you fall asleep?" And then, about an hour later, "Everything okay?" I almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because of how normal it sounded, how carefully everything was still being kept inside the shape of a normal relationship. Like if she stayed inside that tone, that routine, then nothing outside of it could touch her. There was nothing from Nick. Not a call, not a message. And somehow, that made it worse. Because it told me he either didn't know I'd been there, or he did, and he chose silence. Neither option felt better. I unlocked the phone and opened her chat, my thumb hovering over the screen for a second, like I was about to step into something I couldn't walk back out of. And then I typed a single message. "Yeah, I stopped by last night." I looked at it for a moment before sending it, knowing exactly what I was doing, knowing that this wasn't a confrontation. Not yet, but it was enough to shift the ground under whatever story she was still holding on to. I hit send, and then I waited. The typing bubble appeared almost immediately, disappeared, came back again. That alone told me everything I needed to know, because people don't hesitate like that when there's nothing to hide. They don't start and stop unless they're choosing their words carefully, unless they're trying to build something that sounds right instead of something that is right. Finally, the message came through. "Oh, really? I didn't hear you. When?" Simple. Too simple. Like she was testing how much I knew without actually asking. I leaned back against the headboard, staring at the screen, feeling that same cold steadiness settle deeper, replacing whatever hesitation I might have had a few hours earlier, because now it wasn't just about what I saw, it was about how she was handling it. I got there around 11. I typed back slowly, deliberately, giving her just enough to work with. Another pause. Longer this time. The typing bubble didn't show up right away, and in that silence I could almost picture it. Her sitting there, phone in her hand, running through possibilities, trying to figure out what version of the truth she needed to give. And that was the moment it really landed. Not the shoes, not the empty apartment behind that closed door. This, the space between messages, the calculation. Because whatever we had before, whatever I thought it was, didn't include this. Finally, her reply came in. "Oh, I was in the shower. I must have missed it." I stared at that message for a long time, longer than I needed to, longer than it deserved, because it was so clean, so easy, so perfectly placed to explain everything without actually explaining anything. And for a second, I almost respected it. Almost. But the problem with lies like that is they only work if the other person is still willing to meet you halfway. And I wasn't. Not anymore. I looked at the screen, read her message one more time, and felt something settle into place in a way that was final, quiet, and a lot more dangerous than anger. Because now I knew exactly what kind of conversation this was going to be, and I was done playing along. I didn't answer her right away, not because I didn't know what to say, but because for the first time since all of this started unfolding, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing, carefully, deliberately, what came next, and that shift alone felt strange, like stepping into a version of myself that wasn't running from the truth anymore. I set the phone down next to me and just sat there for a minute, letting the silence stretch, because I realized something important in that moment. I didn't need to rush this. Didn't need to push. Didn't need to force a confession out of her. Because the truth was already there, sitting in plain sight. And all I had to do was stop letting her control how it was framed. When I picked the phone back up, I didn't overthink it. I just typed, "Got it." That was it. No accusation, no emotion, no opening for her to adjust the story. And somehow, that felt heavier than anything else I could have said. Because people expect you to react. They expect anger, questions, confusion, something they can work with. Silence? Silence makes them fill in the gaps themselves. She replied almost instantly this time. "You sure everything's okay? You seem off." I read that message and felt this brief, sharp flash of something that might have been anger a few hours ago, but now just felt distant, like I was watching someone try to maintain control of a situation that had already slipped past them. I could have answered, could have played along, could have dragged it out longer. But I didn't want that. I didn't want another half conversation, another layer of pretending that we both knew wasn't real anymore. So instead, I stood up, got dressed, grabbed my keys, and left the apartment without replying. The drive over felt completely different this time. Last night, it was confusion, denial, that slow, sinking feeling of something being wrong without wanting to define it. Now it was clear, cold, focused, not emotional in the way I expected it to be, not explosive, not dramatic, just steady, like everything had already settled into place, and I was just moving through the steps that came after. I didn't text her to say I was coming, didn't call. I just drove. Same streets, same turns, same building. But this time, there was no hesitation when I parked, no pause before getting out of the car, no second guessing whether I should be there. Because this wasn't about catching them anymore. That part was already done. This was about what came next. I walked up to her door and stood there for a second, not because I was unsure, but because I was noticing things I hadn't before. Small details that suddenly felt sharper, like the scratch near the handle, the slight unevenness in the frame, the way the hallway light flickered just a little if you stood there long enough. Normal things. Things that had always been there. I just hadn't been paying attention. Kind of like everything else. I took the key out of my pocket, the same one she'd given me a year ago, like it meant something permanent, something stable, something built on trust. And I held it there for a second, before sliding it into the lock. It turned easily. No resistance. The door opened the same way it always had. Nothing dramatic. No sound. Just a quiet, familiar click. And for a brief second, I thought about last night. About how I had stood in almost this exact position and chosen to walk away. Chosen not to see more than I already had. That wasn't happening this time. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. And this time, I didn't stop at the hallway. The first thing I noticed when I stepped inside wasn't even them. Not right away, but the silence. That strange, heavy kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but instead feels like something just happened, or is about to. Like the air itself is holding on to a moment that hasn't fully landed yet. The apartment looked exactly the same as it always had. Nothing out of place at first glance. The same couch, the same blanket thrown over the armrest, the same faint smell of her shampoo mixed with something warmer. Something unfamiliar that didn't belong to me. And that was when it hit again. Sharper this time. Because now I wasn't imagining it. I was inside it. I took a few steps forward, slow, but not hesitant, my eyes moving across the room in a way that felt automatic, like I was searching without knowing exactly what I was looking for. And then I heard it. A voice. Low, familiar. Nick. It came from down the hallway, slightly muffled, like he wasn't trying to be loud, but also wasn't worried about being heard. And that detail alone told me more than anything else could have, because people only relax like that when they feel safe, when they think they won't be interrupted. I didn't say anything, didn't call out. I just kept walking. Each step felt controlled, measured, like I had all the time in the world, even though I knew exactly where that hallway led, exactly what I was about to walk into, And still, there was no rush, no sudden burst of adrenaline like you'd expect in a moment like this. Just that same cold steadiness that had been building since last night. Another voice. Hers. Quieter. Closer. And there was something in the way they were speaking to each other. Something soft. Something easy. Something that didn't belong to something new or accidental, but to something that had already settled into place over time. That was the part that stayed with me. Not just that it was happening, but how natural it sounded. I reached the end of the hallway and stopped for just a fraction of a second, not to prepare myself, but because I realized there was nothing left to prepare for, nothing left to question, nothing left to doubt. Then I stepped forward and turned into the room. And there they were. Nick was sitting on the edge of the bed, his back half turned toward the door, like he'd just been in the middle of saying something, and Kayla was standing near him, close enough that there was no space between them that could be explained away. No distance that could make this look like anything other than what it was. They both froze. At the same time, like the entire room just locked into place the second I appeared. Nick turned first, slower than I expected, like his body needed a second longer than his mind to catch up, and when his eyes met mine, there was this brief, unfiltered moment where everything showed before he could control it. Shock, confusion, something like guilt, and underneath all of that, something worse. Recognition, like he knew exactly what this moment meant. Kayla didn't say anything, didn't move. She just stood there, looking at me. Her expression caught somewhere between being caught off guard and trying to recover fast enough to reshape what was happening. But there was no reshaping this. Not anymore. And the strangest part, the part I still think about sometimes, is that I didn't feel what I thought I would feel in that moment. There was no explosion, no shouting, no immediate rush of anger breaking through everything else. Just clarity. Cold, steady clarity. Because everything I had been piecing together, everything I had been avoiding naming, everything I had seen without fully accepting, it was all right there in front of me now. Fully formed, undeniable, impossible to twist into anything else. I looked at Nick, then at her, and for a second, none of us said a word. Not because there was nothing to say, but because we all knew that whatever came next was going to change everything. For a few seconds, none of us moved, and none of us spoke, and the silence in that room felt heavier than anything I had experienced so far, because it wasn't just awkward or tense. It was final in a way that left no space for pretending anymore. Like whatever version of reality we had all been living in had already collapsed the moment I stepped through that door. I looked at Nick first, not because I needed him more than her, but because I needed to understand how far this had actually gone. And when I saw him sitting there on the edge of the bed with that frozen posture, like his body had stopped halfway between standing up and staying put, I realized he already knew this wasn't something he could talk his way out of. My voice came out calmer than I expected, almost flat when I finally asked, "Since when?" Because I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't searching for clues I already knew, and I just wanted to hear how they would try to shape it out loud. And Nick exhaled like he had been holding his breath for a long time before saying, "It's not what you think," which would have worked on me a few days ago. But now it just sounded empty, like a reflex people use when they don't have anything real to offer in return. Something in me shifted at that moment, not into anger exactly, but into something sharper and more controlled. And I cut him off before he could continue, because I wasn't interested in hearing a softened version of the truth that still ended in the same place. And Kayla stepped forward slightly, like she thought movement could change the direction of the moment. And she said we were going to tell you in a tone that tried to sound reasonable, but only made it clearer that the decision had already been made without me. I repeated that in my head, going to tell me, as if that somehow made it less real or less dishonest. And I looked at her properly for the first time since I walked in, not just seeing her, but understanding that everything I thought I knew about us had already been rewritten without my involvement. And I asked when. And the pause that followed told me more than any answer could have, because it wasn't uncertainty. It was calculation. like they were deciding how much truth I was allowed to have. Nick finally said a couple months, and that number just hung in the air without meaning at first, until it started connecting to everything I had ignored, everything I had explained away, and everything I had quietly accepted as coincidence, and I repeated it in my head, slowly, because it didn't feel like information. It felt like a gap in time, where I had been living one reality while they had been living another right next to me. I said while we were still together, and Kayla nodded without looking at me fully, and that small movement was worse than any long explanation, because it confirmed that there was no confusion on her side. There was only decision and execution. And I could feel how far back this had actually been happening now, not as theory, but as fact. Because suddenly, every late reply, every canceled plan, every moment of distance had a different shape. I looked at Nick again and told him he had been in my house, sitting at my table, talking to me, like nothing had changed, and he didn't respond because there was nothing he could say that wouldn't sound worse than silence. And I turned to her and said she would look at me, and then text him after I left, and her expression tightened slightly. But she didn't deny it, because denial wasn't available anymore. Not at this stage. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the realization that I had spent months thinking I was losing my mind, when in reality I was just refusing to accept what I was already seeing. And neither of them said anything, because there was no version of this where words would fix what had already been decided. I stood there for another second, looking at both of them, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was inside something emotional or chaotic. I felt like I was outside of it completely, like I had already crossed a line internally that they were still standing behind. And I just nodded once and said, "All right," because there was nothing left to argue with anymore. I turned around and walked out of the room and down the hallway, past the place where everything had started to make sense. And this time, I didn't stop at the door, or look back, or wait for anything else to be said, because I already knew anything they said. After that would just be noise. And when I stepped out of the apartment and closed the door behind me, I didn't feel anger or sadness or even shock anymore. I just felt a strange, quiet heaviness, like something inside me had finally stopped resisting what it already knew.